Today's guest is Brehan Crawford. Brehan is a Chinese medicine practitioner. He specializes in chronic infections, things like long COVID, IBS, POTS, fibromyalgia, but he also treats lots of other things. Today, we delve into the topic of how to fight sugar cravings and really look at it from an overall health and Chinese medicine perspective. Brehan also is the co-founder of Forest for Life. It's a free community group, and I will link to that in our show notes, but it helps people live a better, healthier life. Welcome, Brehan, to the show. Who's the person you're being? Are you satisfied? Welcome to Be the Person, a podcast for the brave and the curious, for people ready to explore their true potential. I'm your host, Annie Randall. Join me and let's get ready to go on this journey together. Welcome to Be the Person podcast. You are in for a treat today. I have Brehan Crawford with me. He is a Chinese medicine practitioner. He has years of experience and talks on so many diverse topics. I'm excited to have him as a guest today because I have lots of questions for him. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Anne. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, I know I've described a little bit about who you are, but can you do it more like describe who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So my professional education is in the world of Chinese medicine. I have a master's degree in that field, and then that graduated from school 15 years ago. Was privileged to get a very intense residency right after graduating and a focus on learning to manage and treat people with a lot of complex chronic illnesses, especially chronic infections, chronic digestive problems, parasitic infection, post-infectious illnesses, like what we would commonly see now as long COVID, things like that. And then have been running a private practice and seeing patients for the last 15 years. And then the last 4 years or so, I've been really engaged in content creation, trying to educate people on social media about how Chinese medicine works, like where it is kind of a slam dunk for many chronic illnesses in a way that Western medicine has a hard time approaching because they often have so many different causes that there isn't a one cause, one pill solution to a lot of these things.
I love it. You have such a great Instagram page and you
Thank
do a
you.
lot of education, but it's very funny and engaging as well.
Thanks. I mean, it can be really dry if you don't throw in a lot of dad jokes and stuff like that. So I try to keep it a little lively so people pay attention.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to link to that because you guys are going to want to follow him. We're going to touch on just a little bit, and there is so much more out there. I went down a rabbit hole when I was preparing for this podcast of just different topics that you talk about. But one right now that honestly, in the health and wellness space, that I get a lot of people struggling with really how do I control my sugar cravings? Like,
Mm.
that's the one thing that's derailing people. Talk to me about advice on this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great topic. So and I think it's important to cover that too. I'm glad you asked that question because a lot of people do know that there's a huge link between eating sugar, especially eating too much sugar, and many kinds of chronic diseases. So, diabetes, of course, is a famous one. Eating too much sugar of any kind can push you towards prediabetes or type 2 diabetes eventually. And then, of course, people who are struggling with like yeast overgrowths, dysbiosis, as one of the many factors of an illness, many causative elements of an illness. Eating a lot of refined sugar directly feeds those things, and it's not really a helpful behavior to engage in. My favorite thing to do, like the easiest thing that I find a lot that works for a lot of my patients who have sugar cravings, is to intentionally include a serving of cooked vegetables with every meal. And I don't want to say like it doesn't matter at all what those vegetables are, but having a variety of them is definitely the best thing. It's not like you should only eat broccoli or only eat green beans, but just trying to structure meals with that included in it, because many of the beneficial compounds in cooked vegetables are what we call bitter alkaloids. And although the vegetables that we commonly eat nowadays have less of them than they used to, they've been bred for sweetness. Like carrots now are like basically like cake compared to a carrot from 100 years ago. But they're because we like sweet, but they still contain a lot of those beneficial bitter alkaloids, even if the flavor of them is a little bit masked and it's maybe less than they used to have. Getting those in our diet helps to feed the bacteria, feed the flora in our body that control those sweet cravings. And so when we're eating a lot of things with bitter flavors, so green vegetables in particular, and they don't even have to be the super bitter ones like dandelion. It can be a mix of zucchini, brassicas like cabbage, broccoli, kale, chard, all of that kind of spinach, all that kind of stuff, root vegetables too. You get those bitters that help to control sweet cravings immediately. You also get a lot of prebiotic fiber that feeds your healthy flora. And when those healthy flora start to grow more, they crowd out the yeasts that are often contributing to the sweet craving. And it really helps to reduce that over time.
I think I can speak to this of like how true it is because I have a sugar craving and I have in the past.
Yeah.
And up until about 4 years ago, I maybe ate, I don't know, 2 servings of vegetables if I was lucky in a
Hmm.
day.
Hmm.
And now I've really changed that. I do a wide variety. I like bowls. So I do a lot of different kinds of bowls and
Nice.
veggies in there.
Yeah,
And
that's a great practice. The inclusion of vegetables is part of almost every traditional diet on earth. And so where there's a lot of wellness fads that come and go in the modern era, especially with social media, you'll see something just dominate your feed for a year or two. And it looks like every health influencer, every fitness influencer, every person with a great beach body is saying, like, you have to eat this way. And it oftentimes tracks with things that people kind of want to avoid, like eating, like if you see anybody saying you shouldn't eat any vegetables at all, which you do unfortunately see a lot on social media these days. If it doesn't track along with traditional dietary habits that are fairly universal amongst most human cultures, I think it's pretty safe to throw that out.
yeah, that's good. And I love just the fact that of one, it's an addition. It's not a subtraction because a lot of times, like we know we shouldn't eat the sweets, but if you're
Totally.
really craving it, it's so
Yeah. And shaming yourself into a certain kind of behavior almost never works. It's like you can guilt trip yourself for wanting to eat marshmallows, but like in a healthy situation, if the more you eat healthy foods, the less you actually crave those things. And then you can just let go of them without feeling any shame or guilt.
yeah. You talked a little bit about it, but can you touch on it more, like the good and the bad bacteria in your gut and like what
Sure.
is all going on there?
Yeah. So the gut microbiome, the gut bacteria that make us who we are, which you can get metaphysical with this too, because there are a lot of people who think that we as large multicellular organisms actually evolved specifically to carry bacteria around from place to place. We have more non-human cells lining our digestive tract and on our skin than we have human cells, like that actually make us up. And this is the case with all animal life. And so a lot of evolutionary biologists believe that we actually are here just to carry bacteria and other kinds of microflora around from place to place. What makes us healthy in that context is actually having a very diverse array of different species. So many people will focus on taking a probiotic that has like one strain of lactobacillus, one strain of bifidobacter in it. And those things are healthy flora. We do need to have a lot of lactobacillus, a lot of bifidum. But look at the if you look at the microbiome of humans across the planet or in different environments, you'll see that it changes a lot from place to place. Different climates will contribute to a different microbiome profile. Different kinds of traditional diets will contribute to a different profile. Different kinds of clothing that we wear, products we put on our skin, the quality of the air we breathe, the water we drink, all of that makes our microbiome very different. And it's supposed to be that way. We should adapt to the environments around us, as well as the people we hang out with, because we're exchanging microbes with our community all the time. And so a lot of people will look at this and see like, oh, well, this culture is exceptionally healthy. They're a blue zone. They live to be 95 years old. They have great digestive health. Cholesterol's good, all that. Let's look at their microbiome and let's build a supplement around that and adopt it. And it doesn't really work. It doesn't translate into health in other populations. And that's because the microbiome should be adaptable, should be changeable. One thing, though, that is universal is that healthy people tend to have a very diverse array of flora. So you should have some lactobacillus and bifidobacter. You probably also need to have a lot of other species of bacteria in your guts. And whereas things like candida are often vilified, or H. pylori is a great example of this too, they're often vilified as causes of illness. People say, oh, I have candida. Well, we all have candida. You have to have some. You have to have some yeast or you're not healthy. You have to have some H. pylori actually. And so trying to eradicate these things completely is a very juvenile understanding of what healthy cultures actually look like when it comes to human intestinal flora.
Yeah. So basically, am I thinking about this right? If I would say we eat a lot of different fruits, vegetables, nuts, really to feed good bugs and not so to limit the bad bugs, would that be correct?
You can look at it that way. It's not incorrect to say that. It's hard to say that there are bugs that are strictly good and strictly bad. So many of the ones we associate with disease like H. pylori, like candida, even very extreme examples like C. diff that people get in a hospital after antibiotic therapy, it's easy to call those bad because they are implicated in the development of many severe illnesses. Even C. diff can be fatal in some circumstances. But calling them bad just universally is, again, not really a mature understanding of what a diverse and healthy culture looks like, because most of us are carrying a little bit of those around all the time. Same thing goes for the good bugs. Lactobacillus and bifidum are the ones we understand the most to be part of what contributes to health, but there are many subspecies of those that we need. You have to have a diverse array of them. They should be different strains and different sort of dominating the culture in different parts of the GI tract. In women, for example, we often want to see a diverse array of lactobacillus flora in the vaginal canal. And this contributes towards health of the baby during childbirth, which is why, many cases, even in like a cesarean section delivery, the obstetrician will do a swab and then coat the baby in the flora of the mother, just because we have so much evidence now showing that having a healthy colonization of the mother's flora contributes to the baby's health. So eating a wide variety of plants, especially like fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, whole grains, you get many different kinds of fiber. You get many different kinds of phytochemical compounds that are in these plants that mostly go towards feeding a diverse array of healthy flora. And that's why the evidence shows in an overwhelming capacity that prebiotic fibers, which are the things, the implants that we need. You can take them in supplements too, but it's easier, it's better for you to just eat a lot of plants. Eating a good amount of those creates a much healthier outcome for most people regarding the microbiome than it does to take a probiotic supplement.
Okay. I think that's great advice on just, and honestly, I'm a picture person. So I'm kind of picturing what's going on inside of my body and
Yeah.
giving why you should do
Uh-huh.
this.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing people don't often think about when it comes to the health of their flora and the diversity of a microbiome is the climate conditions inside our body that allow certain critters to thrive or not. And so, if you have, this is one area where Chinese medicine excels because we have always looked at, for 5,000 years, we've been looking at climactic factors and how they affect human health. And so, we notice that people who live in very hot, wet climates have very different health and disease outcomes than people who live in cold, dry climates, which would kind of be an opposite of that. Say you can draw the axis the other way. You can be hot and dry versus cold and wet. You have different kinds of health conditions that tend to predominate in these kinds of climactic environments. And when you look at the diets that are indigenous to areas of the world where there's a very cold, wet climate versus a very hot, wet climate, you'll see people eat different foods. You'll see that in cold, dry versus hot dry as well. And so people who think they just need to supplement a specific strain or even a few strains of bacteria may not get the results that they're looking for from taking a probiotic supplement, just because their internal climate in their GI tract is not one in which those bacteria can live. So it's, if you take a bunch of plants that would be really healthy to have in your house, and you go and drop them in Antarctica, they're all going to die. Like they just can't make it in that climate. So if you want to have plants or bacteria look a lot like plants in terms of what helps them live and thrive, if you want those to thrive in your digestive system, it may need to be warmer, it may need to be drier, it may need to be colder, it may need to be more moist. It's finding a Goldilocks zone in there, which eating plants that have understanding the thermal nature of plants can really help with that. So we think of hot, spicy food. Well, it's hot. Those are all warming things. Ginger, curries, hot peppers, things like that. They don't even need to be spicy. It can just be like rosemary, oregano. Those are all they have an aromatic, warming quality to them.
That all makes sense. And I think we all know that sugar cravings like aren't the best. Like you said, it can lead to diabetes
Yeah.
and higher insulin levels. But how does that overall affect longevity of someone as well?
Longevity and sugar cravings, well, cravings I don't know about, but longevity and blood sugar levels are very closely tied to each other. So sugar's necessary. Like you have to have glucose in your body it's the primary energy source for our mitochondria. They can work on ketones, but it's not as efficient in process. Anybody who's tried to eat a ketogenic diet will tell you that the fog is real. Keto flu, the adjustment period is very challenging. Glucose is a very efficient source of fuel for our bodies. And so we do need to have some of it. But when you get sugar in the bloodstream, it's incredibly inflammatory. It creates a whole lot of oxidative stress. We think of antioxidants as being healthy, while sugar is a pro-oxidant. It's really the opposite. And so it's causing a lot of damage to the inside of our body when it's in the blood, which is why you want to be insulin sensitive, not insulin resistant, because insulin is the hormone that kind of rings the doorbell on your cells and says, hey, there's sugar in the bloodstream, let it in because it's causing damage out here. So if you have elevated sugar levels in the blood for a very long period of time, it's causing a lot of inflammatory damage over years and over decades, a big course of a human life. It contributes to the death of your peripheral blood vessels and your peripheral nerves. And this is why famous complications of unchecked diabetes are things like neuropathy, where your hands, your feet, the extremities, your brain don't work as well. You can't feel things. You can't feel the floor through your feet. You can't feel anything through your hands. Your brain becomes foggy. We have Alzheimer's is famously referred to colloquially as type 3 diabetes, but it's a long-term dementia rates with uncontrolled blood sugar are much, much higher than in a healthy population.
Do you feel like you need an adventure or a new challenge in 2025? Join Jeff and I on our Peru trip. We're going to do a one-day hike to Machu Picchu. It's always been on my bucket list, but it's becoming more and more restricted. So right now you can still walk around Machu Picchu, but I believe that won't be the case for long. We're also going to explore the Amazon jungle, the city of Lima, have the option to hike Rainbow Mountain. It's going to be a wonderful trip. It happens next September. See all the full details in the show notes. So tell me a little bit about if somebody came in and they were your patient, they're having these sugar cravings, they have insulin or higher insulin and blood sugar markers. What would be your recommendation then to them?
So I would look at their tongue, because very often so this is a diagnostic tool that we use in Chinese medicine, and it's one that is really safe to teach people how to do at home as well. And if you see somebody who has a tongue that has a really thick white or yellow coating on it, like a really greasy tongue coating, you can almost always be assured that they have a dysbiosis that's going to be fraught with elevated levels of biofilm, pathogenic biofilm, which is mucus. And again, this is something that needs to be in balance. We're not trying to eliminate all mucus from the body. You would die without mucus. Your stomach would digest itself from the inside out. But having too much can host pathogenic organisms. It can host infectious diseases. It can host parasites. It can host flora that are not necessarily healthy for you. And some of the flora that we've talked about already all create their own biofilm reservoirs because they like being in a moist environment that way. So if somebody has a thick tongue coating, which most people with blood sugar regulation problems do, whether they're insulin resistant or type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic or just heading that direction, a lot of people will come in, they'll have some vague symptoms of diabetes and their doctor will say, "Oh, you're fine." And we'll look at their labs and we'll evaluate their family history. And I'll say, "You're not technically pre-diabetic, but you could be like pre-diabetic. You're heading that direction. It's just going to be 5 more years, 10 more years till you get the diagnosis, but you're having symptoms of it now. Let's change things in the present time." So when we see that in the tongue, a thick coating, and we correlate that with someone's clinical history and presentation, what I'm going to do most of the time is recommend a dietary change to include more cooked plants, more vegetables, maybe even more fruit. Well, fruit does have sugar, but it also has a lot of fiber with it. And if you eat carbs with a buddy, it slows down the absorption of that sugar so it doesn't spike your blood glucose so high. And we oftentimes see with very simple changes, we might use some herbal medicine as well, but we see very simple changes make a really profound difference in people's blood sugar health over a long period of time.
You said two things in there that I want to get more information about. One is the cooked vegetables. Like, can you say cooked
Mhm.
versus raw? And then
Yeah.
more, can you talk about the tongue in Chinese medicine and why you look at the tongue?
Sure. So, cooked versus raw, I love talking about this because it's something that a lot of people think is not really important. But if you look at the history of humanity, we have evidence of people cooking food everywhere we have evidence of people having lived on the planet. It is something that humans have been doing before we had written language. And we have cultural prohibitions against eating raw food, against eating raw vegetables in many places around the world as well, particularly in countries like China, where historically people have used night soil, like human feces, as fertilizer. There is a superstition against eating raw vegetables because it's not safe. And these things, even if you wash them, there's still a possibility you're going to get contaminants on there that can make you very sick. Um, Even in the Western world, in developed countries, we're constantly having produce recalls from major grocery stores of something that's contaminated with salmonella, something that's contaminated with E. coli from the produce department. We don't use human night soil in the United States unless you're putting it in your own garden, but the stuff you get in the grocery store isn't necessarily clean, even if it's been washed. So in Chinese cuisine, no one will feed you raw vegetables if they care about your health unless they've been obsessively cleaned and then probably pickled, and then they're served with hot spices because raw food is colder by nature. So we're talking about warm and cold foods. They're always going to warm that up. So you'll see pickles served with hot chili peppers. You'll see fruit is often given as a dessert after a meal, but it's the peel has been removed from it. You'll see that kind of thing is done both because of the history of agriculture in those countries, but also because just eating too much cold stuff is hard on our digestive system. We're really well adapted to eating foods that are already pre-digested a little bit, which cooking, fermentation, curing food, all kind of starts that enzymatic process of protein and fiber breakdown.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And then second part of that, really a different question, but tell me more about the tongue in Chinese medicine.
Yeah. Okay. So the tongue is grown when we are an embryo out of 4 different pharyngeal plates. Pharyngeal arches or pharyngeal plates are these things. So if you think of human embryology, like before we start to look like a person, we look like a tube. And each of the sections of the tube kind of develop into these little arches which grow into sections of our body. So you have a plate or an arch that grows into like the pelvic cavity and the lower body, and you have one that becomes kind of your mid thoracic cavity where all your digestive organs are, and you have one that becomes the upper body and the head and upper chest and torso. All 4 of those arches emerge into the tongue, and so the tongue is actually built out of all four arches. They are represented there. The tongue also is a muscle that we can directly observe and see. So by looking at it, we're able to see what, based on its shape and its color, we can tell a lot about the thermal nature of the body. Is it too hot or too cold? That's easy to tell from the color of the tongue. You can tell if blood is circulating smoothly throughout the body, or if there are areas where microcirculation is impacted some way. It's not happening very well. You can tell fluid metabolism. This is a big part of Chinese medicine, is noticing if somebody, because we're mostly water, right? And so if you're, and that water, just like in nature, needs to be moving, just like blood in our body, water needs to be moving around all the time. If you see a clear running stream that's very close to a spring in nature, and the water is fresh and animals haven't peed in it, and there's nothing growing there that's really nasty, that's safe to drink. And if you see water that's still, that's shallow, that's got algae growing in it, it's a place where a lot of animals are coming to drink. They're probably also relieving themselves close by, or there's predators that may be chewing on a carcass that's degrading in that water. That's not safe to drink. You don't want to do that. It'll make you very sick. So water in our bodies is very similar. You want it moving all the time. You want it to be refreshed all the time. And the tongue allows us to see if it's too swollen, we'll see tooth marks on the edges of the tongue, scalloping, where it's been pressing up against the insides of the teeth. We'll see a very wide tongue body, which can indicate somebody's got a lot of phlegm, a lot of extra mucus. The tongue coating is directly produced by our intestinal flora. And so by looking at a healthy tongue coating should be either thin and white or no coating at all. And you can have too dry of an intestinal environment where there's like no coating at all, and the tongue is very red and starting to show a lot of cracks. But if you see a very thick tongue coating on there, that's almost certainly what we would call an excess damp presentation, where there's too much biofilm forming microbiota.
And so, what would you say? Obviously, a lot of that is fixed internally, but what would
Mhm.
you say about like tongue scraping or brushing your tongue?
It's fine. It's very safe unless you're just you're doing it while you're going for a run. The scraping will remove that tongue coating for a period of time, but it will always come back. So if you have a really ugly, gross, thick tongue coating and you're sensitive about that, you feel embarrassed by that, it's fine to scrape it off. If it makes a lot of odor, some tongue coatings create a pretty foul odor and you have bad breath, it's fine to scrape it off. But you should know that it will always come back until you actually fix what's going on the inside that causes it to be there in the first place.
Okay, makes sense. You talked a lot about things that we should be eating. Are there any things that you really try and stay away from?
I try to stay away from things in excess. And so there aren't any particular categories of food that I personally just avoid completely, as long as it's food, right? We're not just eating wrapping paper out of the trash can or something like that. But if I do think people should really limit the quantities of stuff they eat that's really bad for them in excess. And so, and mostly that's the super processed foods, high amounts of refined sugar, alcohol. You can eat too much of anything. What I really like is to help people get to a place where they can eat basically whatever they want within reason. And as long as they're following a healthy template for their overall diet, having an occasional handful of potato chips or having a cocktail or a glass of wine occasionally, it shouldn't really destroy your health.
Yeah. What about I've heard a lot on the internet about organic versus not organic. What is your take on that?
There's a lot of nuance to that. So
Okay.
the thing that I don't see talked about very often regarding organic food and the use of pesticides and insecticides and things like that in produce or on any kind of food, anything that makes it into our food distribution networks, is that by and large, as a population, we no longer have to face the reality of famine. And famine and starvation are something that for most populations these days on the planet don't exist in living memory. There are exceptions to that, but it's pretty rare. Most of the time, for several generations, pretty much everywhere around the world, people have been able to get enough calories to survive. And that's because of pesticides. largely. And food preservation. We have preservatives, we have refrigeration, we have packaging, which plastics come with their own problems. But we also have a lot more food available to us than we ever have before, and we don't really have to worry about running out as long as the systems stay in place, which is a whole other topic. There's never a free lunch in nature. You never get something for free. You always have to make a trade for that. And the trade that we have made to have that stable food supply system, we don't really know all of the impacts. We don't really know all of the costs yet. We know some. Much of the evidence around pesticides, particularly in terms of our health, is only very clear for the people who are actively spraying it on crops without any kind of protection. Those people are in danger of pesticide poisoning, without a doubt. And we should have better worker safety in that kind of circumstance. The effects on most of us who are eating that food are a lot harder to determine. And so there's a lot of preliminary evidence that some of these pesticides that are being used are causing cancer or contributing to cancer, maybe not outright causing it, but making it more likely. They can be contributing towards the chronic, many different kinds of gut problems that get labeled as IBS, which is a diagnosis of exclusion. There is fairly solid research that, what is the main one? Roundup's the trade name. I'm forgetting it.
Glyphosate?
Glyphosate. Thank you. Yeah. That glyphosate is contributing towards antibiotic resistance. So antibiotic resistance kills a few million people a year now, and it's projected to increase to something like 50 million people a year over the next 20 years, I believe. And one of the things that's contributing towards that is glyphosate use, because glyphosate is an antibiotic. And so when bacteria have many of the same enzymatic pathways that glyphosate affects as plants, because it's an herbicide. And so when we eat stuff that is coated in glyphosate, we're getting very small doses of it, but it is having an effect on our intestinal flora. And it is possible, although the evidence is not yet conclusive, that it could be contributing towards less diverse microbiome for us, which we talked about is not really healthy, and also towards antibiotic resistance, which means if you get a bacterial infection, the life-saving medication might not work for you. And I'm a little worried about that. There are also the label of organic is more of a social certification than a medical certification. So there, even if a food is labeled as organic, it can still have pesticides on it. And it's not just because the certification was fraudulent, although that does happen. It's because there are pesticides that are allowed to be used, which are on organic food. They're called organic pesticides, and some of them are made from things like copper, but that we would consider natural. But too much copper can poison you. So just buying organic isn't necessarily the path to health that a lot of people think it is. That being said, I personally buy stuff with as little pesticide on it as I can get, reasonably speaking. If you become obsessive about that, it's such a huge stressor that it's going the stress alone of worrying about it is going to cause more problems than the pesticides probably will. I really like to buy local produce. I live in an area where I'm really lucky enough to we have a farmer's market for a good chunk of the year here. It's easy to grow a garden. My wife and I have a garden. We have many friends who have gardens. We trade stuff around. Getting local fresh produce, I think, and just eating vegetables, eating cooked plants a lot, I think, and not worrying about the pesticide content is healthier than being really obsessed about a specific label on the food.
Okay. I like that. Tell me, I know that again, you speak on a lot of different topics, a lot of health topics. We've kind of honed in on the sugar cravings and the way to eat to avoid those. But anything else that today you're seeing a lot of that is affecting overall health that you feel like you should share with the audience?
The thing that's up for me right now is the link between gut health and emotions, and emotional health, psychological health. I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate the impact that the gut brain axis has on our mental health. And it's things of like, most people just aren't eating enough fiber. And even if they resort to taking a fiber supplement, or even if they're able to eat more plants in their diet overall. And some people think when I talk about, like, mostly we've talked about eating plants on this show today. I'm not against eating animal products either. I'm not trying here to promote a vegan or vegetarian agenda. Protein is important too. But if we're looking at what people need for their health, I think fiber is the key nutrient that's missing from a lot of people's diets, and plants are the best way to get that. And the effects that has on our psyche are profound. And I can't tell you how many people, how many of my patients who all have a low level of background anxiety, when we get their digestive system fixed, they just have a happier, easier going attitude. And they find that they're more resilient in the face of life's stresses. They find that they're more they have an easier time relaxing with the friends and family. And the benefits of having healthy community relationships are extremely profound. It's, the quality of your, famously, as Harvard says, the quality of your relationships in your 40s is a better predictor of your health and longevity than any lab test. And that often starts with fiber, as strange as that sounds. The promotion of mental health through gut health, I really think it's undervalued.
I love that because a lot of people, it might be hard to start making this change, adding vegetables and doing these different things. But I think you're so right that when you do that, not only does your health change, but you're right, your emotions, that anxiety, depression, that can also get better. So I love that you
Yeah,
mentioned that.
thank you.
I always like to wrap up with people's 1 to 2 favorite books. They can be on the topic we talked about, but they absolutely don't have to be. They can be any of your favorites.
So I have two specifically about Chinese medicine and gut health that I'd love to share. The first one is written by a dear friend and colleague named Andrew Miles, and it's called Enlighten Weight, like enlightenment, but instead of ment, it's weight, Weight. And you might think it's about weight loss. It's really more about gut health. And it's about the principles of Chinese medicine as it relates to finding a healthy diet for you. And he very carefully lays out those 4 quadrants of climate that we discussed earlier, like hot, damp, hot, dry, cold, dry, and what kinds of dietary choices can be helpful whichever quadrant you find yourself in. And it's about, like, how to structure a healthy diet for yourself. It's not about rigid rules. It's not about, like, you must avoid all grapes and always eat beans. It's not like that. It's about creating an understanding of what a healthy diet picture looks like, and then giving you the tools you need to create that effortlessly. The other one is fairly new, and it's called Chinese Medicine for the Mind. And it is, I think, a fantastic compilation. It's also designed, both of these books are not designed for professionals. They're designed for the general public, but they're very professionally done. And Chinese Medicine for the Mind covers a lot of the way that Chinese medicine integrates mental health with physical health. So we don't look at there being any difference between the two. The mind is the quality of the mind, the actions of the mind, the way that our brain works is really reflective of the internal health of our physiology and organs of our body. And so when you have a gut health, like we talked about, when you have a healthy gut, your brain tends to work a lot better. Same goes for a healthy heart, healthy liver, healthy kidneys, healthy respiratory system. And all of these things contribute towards mental function. And the mental function is just reflective of the internal state of our body. I shouldn't say just, there's other things too, but that's a huge part of it. This book describes that in a very easy to approach way. And it also has specific chapters on things like anxiety, on depression, on trauma, that I think a lot of people will benefit from understanding. And they give breathing exercises, acupuncture points on your body. You can massage yourself. You don't need to learn how to needle them. Don't do that to yourself at home. Exercises you can do, breathing exercises, and then herbal formulas that are commonly shared amongst the lay population in Asia. If you're feeling ill, in many parts of Asia, especially in China, you don't necessarily go to a doctor first. You see your grandmother first. You see a trusted family member first, and because they have a good enough understanding of herbal medicine to just say, "Oh, you just need some Xiaoyawan," or "Oh, you just need some Lue Di Huangwan," something like that. And the book also starts with how important a good night's sleep is, which I think is really underappreciated in terms of its effects on mental health.
Yeah. I have not heard of either one of those, so I'm going to definitely check out both of those. We'll link to them in the show notes. Brian, I know that people are going to want to find out more about you. You have a couple interesting free groups that I would love for you to share, and then any other way to best get in touch with you.
Yeah. So I have a free group on School, SKOL, that platform. The group is called The Chorus Circle, CHORUS. And we have 2 live Qigong classes in the group every week where we practice gentle movement and breathing exercises together for the promotion of health. We also post the recordings if people can't make a live class time. And then the forums in that group are a place where people can come to post pictures of their tongue, talk about questions they have regarding their health. And many of the members in the group will be very supportive and offer feedback and stuff from their own history as they've recovered. And we moderate it pretty well to make sure nobody's doing anything harmful in there. If people want to work with me one-on-one, they can contact my practice. It's crawford-wellness.com. And I have both in-person and online consultations available.
I will make sure I link to both of those. Thank you for doing
Thank
that
you.
free group and just giving back to the community too.
Yeah, a lot, like I was saying, in Asia, a lot of the really effective stuff is just shared as a form of community health. And it's just like here, if you say to your best friend, I'm really thirsty, they'll give you a sip from their own water bottle because they care about you. If you're feeling anxious and you can't sleep, somebody might give you an herbal sleep aid in Asia that helps you get a good night's rest. And so what we're trying to do in the Chorus Circle is really just fill in the gaps in community health here. The Western medical system is not that great. It's really hard to receive good care. It takes a long time. It's very expensive. You're often met with many hurdles from insurance companies, from providers' offices. And then oftentimes when you finally get a prescription, it might manage symptoms a little bit, but it often comes with some pretty bad side effects. And so what we're really trying to do is help people cultivate health from the ground up by helping each other. And Chinese medicine is very safe for this. It's based in both scientific evidence and 2,000 to 5,000 years of tradition. And we just love watching people help each other.
Love it. Well, I will make sure I link to that in our show notes so people can look into and join that community.
Great.
I appreciate everything, that you have shared with us today. So helpful and insightful. So thank you for being a guest.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
As always, thank you for joining Be the Person podcast. If this resonates with you, please share it with somebody that you know. And as always, it would mean the world if you gave us a 5-star review. Thanks for joining today.